Alpha Sanctuary. A Werewolf Shifter Romance. Chapter 1. The boat hummed beneath me as we sliced through the turquoise water, the breeze whipping my hair into a nest of tangles. I tried to tame it with my fingers, but let's face it, the damage was already done. First impressions be damned. If this was the start of a fairy tale, I was clearly the bedraggled maiden, minus the castle and plus a mild case of seasickness. Luna Haven, the captain called out, pointing toward the horizon. My gaze followed his finger, and for a moment I forgot how queasy I felt. The island rose like something out of a dream, white sand beaches kissed by emerald waves, lush greenery framing sleek, modern villas perched along the cliffs. It was the kind of place you'd see on travel magazines and wonder if they photoshopped the hell out of it. Turns out they didn't. I leaned forward, trying to take it all in. The boat docked at a private pier so pristine, I hesitated to step onto it, worried I might smudge the wood with my very existence. A young man in crisp linen greeted me with a polite smile and offered to take my luggage, which amounted to a single suitcase I'd packed in a frenzy. Minimalism, or sheer lack of planning, you decide. Welcome to Luna Haven, Miss Hale, he said, his tone warm but practiced. Mr. Cain is waiting for you, Mr. Cain, I repeated, lugging my carry-on over my shoulder. Do I need to curtsy or anything? The man blinked. No laugh, not even a smirk. Tough crowd. I followed him along the winding path leading to the main resort. The sun soaked into my skin, and the scent of salt and coconut filled the air. Around me, villas gleamed like polished jewels, each with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic ocean views. I passed a tranquil infinity pool that seemed to spill directly into the horizon. It was so beautiful, it almost made me forget how ridiculously out of place I felt. Almost. The man stopped at the entrance of the main pavilion, an airy structure with minimalist stone architecture and tropical greenery spilling from every corner. He motioned for me to enter, and I stepped inside, my sandals echoing against the smooth tiles. And that's when I saw him. Elias Cain. He stood at the far end of the pavilion, a tall figure silhouetted by the sunlight streaming in through the open archways. His hands were tucked into his pockets, his linen shirt rolled up at the sleeves, and he had this way of standing, like he owned the ground he walked on. Which I guess he technically did, Miss Hale. His voice was low and smooth, like the first sip of a really good whiskey. Welcome to Luna Haven. Thanks, I said, pulling myself together. Though full disclosure, I'm not sure if I'm here to work or to steal decorating tips. That earned me a flicker of something amusement. Annoyance. Hard to tell with him. His face was all sharp lines and cool detachment, but his eyes, a piercing shade of silver blue, had a way of pinning you in place, like he could see right through the jokes to whatever you were trying to hide. You'll find this isn't your typical resort, he said, walking toward me, and I'm not your typical boss. Good, I replied, meeting his gaze, because I'm not your typical therapist. For a second, I thought I saw his lips twitch, but it was gone before I could be sure. He extended a hand, and when I shook it, his grip was firm, his skin warm, the kind of handshake that made you feel like you were being tested. Your quarters are ready, he said, releasing my hand. You'll have a full briefing tomorrow. For now, settle in and explore the grounds. Stay within the marked areas. The way he said it, marked areas sounded less like a guideline and more like a warning. My curiosity flared, but I bit my tongue. No need to get fired before I even unpacked. Got it, I said. Stay where I'm supposed to. Don't cause trouble. Easy. His gaze lingered on me, sharp and assessing. Let's hope so. And with that, Elias Cain turned and walked away, his stride as deliberate as his words. I watched him go, wondering what exactly I'd gotten myself into. Whatever it was, it definitely wasn't a fairy tale. Or maybe it was, but the kind with wolves hiding under sleek, tailored clothing. The pavilion was cool and airy, the sea breeze weaving through the open archways and ruffling the gauzy curtains. It smelled like saltwater and money, clean, crisp, and just a little bit smug. I glanced around at the sleek furniture and minimalist decor, trying not to feel like an intruder in someone else's fantasy. My sandals slapped against the polished stone floor, a sound that screamed newbie more than I'd like. Miss Hale, a voice called out. smooth as honey and twice as thick with charm. I turned to see him leaning casually against the edge of a low-slung bar that gleamed under the golden light. He was devastatingly handsome in the kind of way that made my brain short-circuit for a second. Black hair slicked back, just enough to look effortless, not greasy. Dark eyes, the kind that promise secrets you probably shouldn't want to know. And a smile so sharp, it could have sliced through steel. He wasn't just attractive, he was dangerously attractive, like a live wire draped in designer linen. "And you are?" I asked, straightening my posture in an attempt to seem unruffled. Spoiler, I wasn't. "Damon Wolf," he said, the name rolling off his tongue like it was the answer to a question I hadn't asked yet. "Guest of this fine establishment and, apparently your first introduction to the wonders of Luna Haven. First impressions matter," I quipped, crossing my arms. "Should I be worried?" His smile widened, all teeth and mischief. "Only if you bore easily." The way he said it made me feel like I'd just been dared to figure him out. Not that I had time for distractions. My mission was to help people here, not flirt with mysterious guests who probably moonlighted as villains in James Bond movies. Still, I couldn't help but notice the way he moved, a lazy confidence, like the world owed him something, and he was just waiting to collect. He wore a crisp white shirt with the top few buttons undone, revealing a hint of a tanned chest. I hated how much I noticed that. Really hated it. "So," I said, forcing a neutral tone, "are you here to relax, or do you just hang around entrances to charm unsuspecting women?" "Who says I can't do both?" His gaze dropped to my suitcase. "New here, aren't you? Is it that obvious?" Well, the lost puppy expression was a hint, but don't worry. He stepped closer, his voice dropping just enough to feel intimate. "Luna Haven has a way of growing on people." I was about to respond something witty, obviously, when a shadow fell over us. I turned to see Elias Cain, and let's just say the temperature in the room dropped a few degrees. He stood there, tall and imposing, his silver blue eyes zeroing in on Damon like he was deciding whether to swat a fly or just burn it alive. "Wolf?" Elias said, his voice a low rumble. "You're in my way." "Charming as ever, Cain," Damon replied, his tone light but with an undercurrent of something sharper. "I was just welcoming your new recruit. Someone has to, after all." Elias didn't bother replying. His eyes shifted to me, and the weight of his gaze was almost enough to knock me over. "Miss Hale," he said, his tone curt. "Your quarters are ready. Follow me." It wasn't a request, but then again, I didn't think Elias Cain was the kind of man who made those. I glanced back at Damon, whose smirk only deepened. "Careful," he murmured as I passed him. "This place is full of surprises." Something about the way he said it sent a shiver down my spine, not fear exactly, but the kind of tension that came from knowing you were walking into a story far bigger than yourself. And Damon Wolf? He was definitely the kind of man who thrived in a plot twist. I followed Elias out of the pavilion, my suitcase rolling behind me, my mind already spinning. One thing was clear: Luna Haven wasn't just a beach resort. It was a stage, and I'd just met two leading men. One stoic and brooding, the other charming and dangerous. And me. Well, I was the idiot who had no idea which one was the wolf in sheep's clothing. The cliffs glowed in the golden haze of twilight, their rugged edges painted with streaks of deep orange and violet. I was supposed to be settling into my villa, unpacking my very practical, red, boring wardrobe, and gearing up for my new job as Luna Haven's resident therapist. Instead, I was wandering, drawn by the salty air and the way the last light of day shimmered off the ocean like liquid gold. Somewhere behind me, I heard a soft laugh, the kind that came with a side of trouble. I didn't need to look to know it was Damon. I didn't know what it was about him. He was like the human equivalent of a siren song, equal parts danger and intrigue. If Elias Cain, my mysterious new boss, was a locked door, Damon Wolf was the door you weren't supposed to touch, but kind of wanted to kick open, just to see what was on the other side. I wouldn't go too close to the edge, his voice floated over to me, smooth as the tide. "Unless you're auditioning for a dramatic rescue." I turned, my arms crossed. "Do you always follow people around? Or is this a special service for new arrivals?" He leaned casually against a boulder, his hands shoved into his pockets, exuding a kind of effortless cool that should have been illegal. "Just looking out for you. This place can be unpredictable." Unpredictable how? I asked, raising a brow. Are we talking wild monkeys? Angry seagulls? Because I can handle a seagull. Maybe. His smile widened, revealing a flash of teeth that was just a little too sharp. Something like that. Before I could press him further, my gaze flicked past him and landed on something strange near the cliffside. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, the sun playing games with the jagged rocks. But as I stepped closer, I realized they weren't just rocks. There were symbols, etched into the stone, faintly glowing as if they'd been painted with stardust. They pulsed, soft and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. What? The word slipped out before I could stop it. I took another step, my breath hitching. The pull was magnetic, like the air itself was urging me forward. The symbols weren't random. They were deliberate, beautiful, even, but they hummed with something I couldn't quite name. Something alive. You shouldn't get too close, Damon said, his voice lower now, almost a whisper. I stopped but didn't look at him. What is this? Nothing you need to worry about. He moved closer, his presence suddenly overwhelming. But if you're curious, his words trailed off, and for a moment, I thought he might actually explain. Instead, he stepped into my space, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off him. Curiosity's dangerous around here, Serena, he said, his tone both teasing and serious. You never know what you might find. I swallowed hard, torn between backing away and stepping closer to those glowing symbols and him. The pull wasn't just toward the cliffs anymore. It was toward him. His eyes, dark and glinting, held something I couldn't name. A promise? A warning? Probably both. Dangerous doesn't scare me, I said, surprising myself with how steady I sounded. His grin returned, sharp and knowing. Good. You'll fit right in. And then he was gone, sauntering back toward the path, like he hadn't just rewritten the laws of gravity in my world. I turned back to the symbols, my skin tingling as the last rays of sunlight faded. The glow dimmed with them, the strange etchings disappearing into the shadows, as if they'd never been there at all. But the pull stayed. And so did the sound of Damon's laughter, echoing in my ears long after he'd vanished. Chapter 2. The sun was doing its thing, sinking into the ocean in a dramatic blaze of oranges and pinks, the kind of sunset that travel brochures would kill for. The private gathering was just as picture-perfect, twinkling lights strung between palm trees, the hum of conversation mixed with soft music, and drinks that sparkled in delicate glasses like they came with a side of magic. I sipped something fruity and vaguely dangerous, trying to blend in. Easier said than done when you felt like the only piece of IKEA furniture in a showroom full of antiques. Everyone around me was too polished, too confident, and too something. The kind of something that made you feel like you'd stumbled into the wrong party. And then there was Damon Wolf. He leaned against the edge of the bar, looking like he owned not just the party but the entire island. His shirt was half unbuttoned, of course it was, revealing just enough of his chest to make you wonder why he bothered with buttons at all. His drink dangled lazily from one hand, the other shoved into his pocket. Casual. Effortless. Unfair. You look like you could use some company, he said, appearing at my side like a particularly charming shadow. I'm fine, thanks, I replied, though my voice betrayed me by being about half an octave higher than usual. Fine, he echoed, his lips curling into a smirk that could have melted steel. You're sipping that cocktail like it insulted your family. Let me guess it's too sweet. No, it's perfect, I said, defensive now. I just wasn't expecting it to sneak up on me like that. His smile widened, and the air between us shifted. Funny, I was thinking the same about you. Oh, come on, who even says things like that? And why did it work? Do you practice these lines? Or is this just raw talent? I asked, trying to sound unimpressed. Spoiler alert, I failed. You tell me, he said, his voice dipping just enough to make my stomach flip. Before I could answer, probably with something snarky that wouldn't land, he tilted his head toward the beach, his expression suddenly conspiratorial. Come with me? What? Come on, he said, already moving. This party's dull and you don't seem like the dull type. My feet betrayed me before my brain could catch up. 1 second, I was standing by the bar, and the next, I was following him down a narrow path lined with flickering torches. The air grew quieter as we walked, the sounds of the party fading behind us, until there was nothing but the gentle crash of waves and the occasional rustle of palm fronds. "Where are we going?" I asked, though the nervous flutter in my chest already knew the answer. "You'll see," he said over his shoulder, his voice dripping with the kind of promise that made my pulse skip. And then he stopped, just as the path opened onto a secluded cabana nestled between the rocks and the sand. The cabana was simple but perfect, white curtains fluttering in the breeze, a low couch covered in soft cushions, and the glow of candles casting golden light over everything. It felt intimate, like a secret someone had decided to share with me. "This is nice," I said, my voice catching slightly. "Nice?" Damon repeated, stepping closer. "I think we can do better than that." His hand found mine, warm and steady, and the world tilted slightly. I should have pulled away, made an excuse, done literally anything other than stand there like I was caught in a spell. But I didn't. "You feel it, don't you?" he murmured, his gaze locked on mine. "That pull." I swallowed hard. "What pull?" "This." He closed the distance between us in a heartbeat, his lips brushing against mine with a softness that made my knees weak. The kiss deepened, his hands sliding to my waist as the air between us grew electric. Every nerve in my body lit up, and suddenly, nothing else existed, just the heat of his touch, the crash of the waves, and the wild, unshakable feeling that this was inevitable. Clothes slipped away like afterthoughts, leaving only skin and fire and the raw intensity of the moment. His touch was everywhere, his movements deliberate, his mouth tracing a path that left me breathless. The cabana became our world, a haze of candlelight and tangled limbs, the kind of passion that burned too bright to last but left an indelible mark all the same. The kiss deepened, his hands sliding to my waist as the air between us grew electric. Every nerve in my body lit up. And suddenly, nothing else existed, just the heat of his touch, the crash of the waves, and the wild, unshakable feeling that this was inevitable. Clothes slipped away like afterthoughts, leaving only skin and fire and the raw intensity of the moment. His touch was everywhere, his movements deliberate, his mouth tracing a path that left me breathless. The cabana became our world, a haze of candlelight and tangled limbs, the kind of passion that burned too bright to last, but left an indelible mark all the same. I gasped as Damon's tongue delved into my mouth, claiming it with a fierce intensity. He tasted of heat and promise, and my skin felt like it was on fire. His thumb edged under my shirt, caressing the sensitive skin just above my hip bone, sending tendrils of pleasure through me. My hands found the belt of his pants, fumbling with it in my haste. He chuckled against my lips, the sound deep and satisfying. "In a hurry, are we?" he drawled. His voice was thick with need, his eyes dark as he gazed at me. "Maybe," I teased, though my words were breathless. "Unless you're trying to put off the inevitable." He laughed then, and the sound was heartfelt, full of sinful intent. "Oh baby, you haven't seen inevitable yet." He was kissing me again, his hands roaming over my body like he was trying to map every curve, every line of my skin. They slid up my sides, cupping my breasts and kneading the soft flesh. My nipples hardened under his touch, begging for more. "Damon," I whimpered, my voice nearly lost under the sound of the waves. His name on my lips seemed to spur him on. His kisses grew harder, feeding on the desperation in my voice. His fingers ghosted over my hips and down to my thighs, tugging at the edge of my shorts, teasingly playing with the lace of my panties. I could feel myself growing wet, my body responding to his touch. "Please," I begged, grinding against him. "Please what?" His voice was lower now, more guttural, filled with want. "You know what you want," I whispered hotly. When it was over, the air felt different, thicker, heavier, like the island itself was holding its breath. Damon lay beside me, his gaze unreadable, and for a fleeting moment, I wondered if he felt it too, that strange, sinking certainty that we'd just crossed a line we couldn't uncross. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer than I expected. "Yeah," I lied, staring up at the billowing curtains. "I'm fine." But I wasn't fine, not even close, because deep down, I knew this wasn't just a mistake. It was the mistake. And it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The cabana was quiet now, the soft crash of waves outside the only sound breaking through the haze of the moment. I lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite pin down. Somewhere between what have I done and did that really just happen? Damon stretched out beside me, one arm draped lazily over his head, looking entirely too pleased with himself. His hair was slightly mussed, and there was a satisfied glint in his dark eyes, the kind that made you wonder if he'd just won some game you didn't know you were playing. Well, he drawled, his voice like silk laced with mischief. That was enlightening. I propped myself up on one elbow, narrowing my eyes. Enlightening? What am I, a TED Talk? He laughed, low and rich, and I hated how much I liked the sound. More like a revelation, he said, leaning closer. One I don't think either of us will forget anytime soon. Something about the way he said it made my stomach twist, not the good kind of twist either. There was a weight to his words, a deliberate edge that sent my instincts buzzing. But I shook it off, blaming the lingering adrenaline and the fact that my brain still felt like it had been dunked in a vat of warm honey. I sat up, tugging the thin blanket around me like armor. Well, congratulations on your revelation. I'm glad I could contribute to your personal growth. His grin didn't waver, but his eyes sharpened, just for a second. Oh, you've contributed more than you know. And there it was again, that nagging sense that I'd stepped onto a chessboard without realizing it. The problem was, I had no idea what the game was, much less what piece I was supposed to be. Damon, I said slowly, what exactly are you playing at? Playing. He shifted, leaning back against the cushions like he had all the time in the world. I'm not playing at anything, Serena. I'm just enjoying the view. I didn't believe him. Not for a second. But the way he looked at me like I was something rare, something he'd fought to claim, made it hard to think straight. There was a flicker of heat in his gaze, yes, but there was something else too. Something darker. Before I could press him further, he reached out, his fingers brushing against mine. It was such a small gesture, but it sent a ripple of warmth through me, a strange, inexplicable pull that made my breath hitch. What are you doing? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Nothing you won't thank me for later, he murmured, his tone so casual it felt like a lie. That's when I felt it, a spark, sharp and electric, running from his touch straight to my core. It wasn't painful, but it wasn't exactly pleasant either. It was binding in a way I didn't understand. My chest tightened, my pulse quickening as a faint glow flickered where his skin met mine. What was that? I pulled my hand back, staring at him. Damon, what the hell was that? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he tilted his head, studying me like I was a puzzle he'd just finished solving. Don't worry, he said, his voice low and smooth. You'll figure it out soon enough. The way he said it made my skin crawl, and not in the fun, flirty way. It was too assured, too calculated, like he'd just laid a trap, and was waiting to see if I'd step into it. Which, judging by the strange, lingering heat in my veins, I already had. I stood, wrapping the blanket around me like a makeshift dress. If this is some kind of joke, Damon, I'm not laughing. It's not a joke, he said, rising to his feet with an ease that only added to my growing frustration. It's an opportunity. For both of us. Opportunity? I echoed, incredulous. What does that even mean? But he didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer, his hand brushing against my arm, just long enough to make me shiver. His lips curved into a smile that was equal parts charming and infuriating. You'll see, he said simply. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the cabana with nothing but my tangled thoughts and the faint hum of something I couldn't name pulsing beneath my skin. As I made my way back to my villa, the weight of the evening settled over me like a heavy cloak. Something had shifted, something I couldn't quite explain. My body felt different, my senses heightened in a way that was both exhilarating and unnerving. I didn't know what Damon had done, but one thing was clear, this wasn't just a mistake. It was a move in a game I didn't even know I was playing. And Damon Wolf? He was playing to win. The air inside the cabana was thick with the scent of salt and something warm, electric, and impossible to name. Damon stood close, too close, his dark eyes locked on mine with the kind of intensity that made my breath hitch. This feels dangerous, I murmured, my voice more of a whisper than I'd intended. His grin widened, slow and deliberate, as if he found my hesitation amusing. Isn't that what makes it exciting? I should have walked away. Every reasonable part of my brain was waving red flags like it was the opening ceremony of the Olympics. But then he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face with a touch so light, it sent shivers down my spine. And just like that, reason packed its bags and left the building. His lips met mine in a rush, warm and insistent, stealing the breath from my lungs. My back hit the cushions of the low-slung couch, and suddenly the world narrowed to the heat of his body and the way his hands seemed to know exactly where to go. It was magnetic, consuming, and just reckless enough to feel inevitable. But beneath the sparks, something didn't sit right. Like the moment when you're staring at a beautiful sunset only to realize a storm is creeping in at the edges. I felt it, but I didn't know what it was. Not yet. Serena, Damon whispered against my neck, his voice sending another shiver through me. You're intoxicating. I should have laughed at the absurdity of it, like I was a top-shelf whiskey or something, but the way he said it made the words stick. His tone was possessive, almost reverent, and not in the swoon-worthy romantic way. It felt like he was staking a claim. Damon, I managed, pulling back slightly to catch my breath. This is a lot. His eyes darkened, his grin faltering for a moment before returning, sharper now. A lot can be good, he said, his voice softer but no less intense. Don't overthink it. I wanted to argue, but then his lips found mine again, and the thought dissolved. The kiss was like fire, demanding and all-consuming, leaving me teetering on the edge of surrender. But the unease didn't leave, it grew. Afterward, the silence was louder than I'd expected. The cabana felt different, smaller somehow, and the air between us hung heavy with something unspoken. Damon sat beside me, his arm draped over the back of the couch, like he owned not just the cabana, but the very ground it was built on. You okay? He asked, his voice smooth, but there was an edge to it I couldn't ignore. Yeah, I said, wrapping the blanket around me and staring at the flickering candlelight. Just processing? Processing? He turned toward me, and the way he said it made me feel like I'd just told him I didn't like puppies. What's there to process? I blinked at him. I don't know the whole this of it. His smile tightened, and for the first time the easy charm seemed to slip, revealing something harder underneath. You don't need to overthink it, Serena. Some things are just meant to happen. Meant to happen. I echoed, narrowing my eyes. That sounds ominous, does it? He leaned in, his gaze unyielding. Maybe you're just reading too much into it. I laughed, though it came out more nervous than I intended. That's kind of my thing, Damon. Reading into stuff. You might have heard I'm a therapist. Well, he said, his voice low and teasing, maybe it's time to stop analyzing and just let go. There it was again, that weight in his words, like he wasn't just talking about tonight. My unease sharpened, and I wrapped the blanket tighter around me as if it could protect me from whatever this was turning into. You know, I said lightly, you're starting to sound a little intense. Intense? He raised a brow, leaning closer until I could see the faint glint of his teeth. That's an interesting word for it. It's the polite word, I shot back, trying to keep the mood light, even as the tension grew. Would you prefer a little much? He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. You have no idea what you're talking about, Serena. Then maybe you should enlighten me, I said, trying to hold my ground. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached out, brushing his fingers against my arm in a gesture that should have been comforting but wasn't. It felt like a warning, subtle and sharp, and I didn't like it one bit. You'll understand soon enough, he said finally, his voice quieter but no less unnerving. I stared at him, my heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with the earlier heat between us. Something was wrong, very wrong, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just stepped into a game I didn't know the rules for. Damon's charm, his touch, his words, they were all part of something bigger, and I had a sinking feeling I was the pawn. When I finally left the cabana, the sky was full of stars, their light sharp and cold against the dark. The unease clung to me like a second skin, every step back to my villa feeling heavier than the last. I glanced over my shoulder once, half expecting Damon to be following me. He wasn't, but somehow, that didn't make me feel safer. It only made me wonder what he was planning next. Chapter 3. I sat in the therapy cabana, yes. A therapy cabana, and tried to ignore how out of place I felt. The space was airy and modern, with plush seating and calming ocean views, but no amount of Zendeker could prepare me for the oddities of my new clientele. My first session was with a guest named Jules, who looked like he'd just stepped off the cover of an outdoor adventure magazine. Tan, rugged, and a little too tense for someone staying at a luxury resort. "So, Jules," I said, forcing my therapist voice calm, professional, the exact opposite of what I felt inside. "What brings you to Luna Haven?" He glanced around like he was expecting someone to burst through the walls. "Stress," he muttered. "Okay," I said, scribbling in my notepad. "What kind of stress?" "Work stress," he said quickly. Too quickly. "Right," I replied, arching a brow. "And what do you do for work?" There was a long pause. "It's complicated." Complicated. Sure. That didn't scream red flag at all. I decided to poke a little, the way therapists do when they want to sound helpful, but are actually just nosy. "Can you elaborate? What makes it complicated?" He shifted in his seat, his muscles rippling under his shirt. Seriously, was he flexing? I didn't think so, but it was hard to tell. "Let's just say I'm in logistics." I blinked. "Logistics? Like supply chain? Something like that?" he said, looking everywhere but at me. Great. My first session, and I'd landed a human wall with the conversational range of a boulder. Still, I pushed forward. "What about this work stress? Is it deadlines, team conflicts, general existential dread?" He finally met my eyes, and for a split second, something flickered there. Something sharp and restless. "It's the team," he said, his voice low. "Let's just say we've had some disagreements about leadership." "Ah," I said, latching onto the thread. "Conflict with authority can be challenging. Have you tried letting them know I'll rip their throat out if they don't fall in line?" He interrupted, deadpan. My pen froze mid-scribble. That's one approach." He stared at me for a moment, then cracked a grin. "Relax. It's a joke." "Right. Hilarious." I laughed nervously, but the hairs on my arms stood on end. It didn't feel like a joke, and unless I was imagining it, his teeth seemed just a little sharper than they should have been. By the time I finished my fourth session, I had a growing list of observations, none of which made sense. 1. Everyone here was way too fit, like protein powder commercial fit. 2. Their stress stories all revolved around vague power struggles and territorial disputes. 3. A surprising number of them flinched when I reached for my pen. Which, okay, maybe I had an intimidating grip, but it was starting to feel suspicious. And then there was the howling. It wasn't loud, just faint enough to be dismissed as wind if you weren't paying attention. But I was. The first time it happened, I glanced up mid-session, only to find my client Rebecca, a sleek, confident woman with a gaze like a hawk, completely unfazed. "Did you hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" she replied, her expression perfectly neutral. "That noise," I said, gesturing toward the open window. "It sounded like a dog?" She interrupted, her tone clipped. "It's probably nothing." She changed the subject so fast, I didn't even have time to process it, but now I couldn't unhear the howling, or unsee the way she'd tensed, just for a moment, before brushing it off. By the end of the day, my brain was swirling with theories, none of them remotely logical. Were these people in some kind of ultra-exclusive CrossFit cult? Were they part of a secret society that only accepted members with glowing skin and suspiciously sharp reflexes? Or was it something else? I thought back to the glowing symbols on the cliffs, to Damon's cryptic comments, and to the strange pull I still felt when he was near. Something was off about this place, and the more I tried to ignore it, the more obvious it became. I stood outside the cabana, watching the sunset bleed into the horizon, when Cora appeared beside me like an overly cheerful ghost. "How was your first day?" she asked, beaming. "Educational?" I said, carefully noncommittal. "Are all the guests here this intense?" "Oh, you'll get used to it," she said breezily, brushing a stray curl from her face. "They're harmless, mostly." "Mostly?" I repeated, raising a brow. She grinned but didn't elaborate. Instead, she handed me a glass of something fruity and dangerous looking. "Relax, Serena. You're here to help people, not interrogate them, right?" I said, taking the drink. "Help people, not question why half of them look like they bench press cars for fun." Cora laughed, though it sounded more like a deflection than genuine amusement. "You're funny." "I like that." I didn't respond. Instead, I sipped my drink and stared out at the waves, trying to ignore the growing feeling that I was in way over my head. Because whatever secrets this place was hiding, I had a feeling I wasn't going to like the answers. And the worst part, I couldn't stop myself from wanting to find them anyway. Elias Cain had mastered the art of making a person feel small. Not intentionally probably, but when a man carries himself like a storm wrapped in linen shirts, it's hard not to feel like you're just a speck in his hurricane. And right now, I was getting the full force windstorm. Morning, I said as I approached him by the cliffs, trying to keep my tone light and breezy. Beautiful day for brooding. Elias turned to me slowly, his silver blue eyes scanning me like I was a math problem he didn't feel like solving. Serena, he said, nodding once. How's the adjustment going? Great. I chirped, maybe a little too enthusiastically. I've only been here a few days and I've already learned so much. Like how your guests love metaphors about territory and dominance. Really unique therapy challenges, let me tell you. The corner of his mouth twitched, but it wasn't a smile. I'm sure you're managing just fine. Okay, that wasn't dismissive at all. Is this about Damon? I asked, folding my arms. Because if it is, maybe you should just say it instead of doing this whole cold, enigmatic routine. His jaw tightened, and for a second, I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes. Frustration, maybe, or hurt, but it was gone before I could pin it down. I don't need to say anything, he replied, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. You seem to have made your choices. My choices? What was that supposed to mean? Of course, Damon chose that exact moment to stroll up, radiating charm like it was his superpower. He was holding a cup of coffee, though I had a sneaking suspicion he didn't drink it. It was probably just a prop to make him seem more relatable. Well, if it isn't my two favorite people, Damon said, his smile all teeth. What's this? A morning meeting without me? Just catching up, I said quickly, though the tension between the two men was so thick, you could have served it with a side of toast. Elias didn't reply. He just gave Damon a look that said, I know exactly what you're doing, and I will destroy you for it. Damon, of course, ignored it entirely. Serena, I was just thinking, he said, turning his attention fully to me. You've been working so hard with the guests. Don't you think it's time you took a little break? I frowned. A break? I've only just started. Exactly, he said smoothly. It's important to pace yourself. Maybe take some time to explore the island. Clear your head. This place has a way of revealing things if you let it. Elias made a noise low in his throat, something between a growl and a scoff. That's enough, Wolf. What? Damon said, his expression the perfect picture of innocence. I'm just looking out for her. Not everyone thrives under constant pressure, you know. Elias didn't respond, but the muscle in his jaw was doing a little dance. I half expected him to launch into some kind of alpha showdown, but instead he turned on his heel and walked away. Wow, I said, watching him go. Subtle. That's Elias for you, Damon said, stepping closer. Too close. Always carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Must be exhausting. I took a step back, trying to create some distance. He's just protective. Protective, Damon repeated, his voice dripping with amusement. Is that what we're calling it now? Damon had a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. It was both intoxicating and unnerving, like being the star of a play you didn't audition for. And lately he'd been using that charm to drop little comments that stuck in my mind like burrs. Elias isn't always as noble as he seems, he'd said during one of our conversations by the beach. He has his secrets. We all do. Or, you ever wonder why he's so quick to keep you at arm's length? Maybe it's not about you at all. And my personal favorite, Luna Haven's a beautiful place, sure. But beauty can hide a lot of ugly truths. It wasn't like I believed him, at least, not entirely. But the more he talked, the more those tiny seeds of doubt started to take root. Why was Elias so distant? Why did the pack act like they were constantly walking on eggshells around him? And why did it feel like there was something no one was telling me? Later that evening, I found myself in the garden, trying to piece everything together. The stars were bright above me, the scent of jasmine filling the air, but my mind was anything but calm. What are you thinking about? Damon's voice cut through the quiet, and I turned to see him leaning against a tree, his expression unreadable. Just trying to make sense of things, I said honestly. He stepped closer, his smile soft but calculated. Some things aren't meant to make sense. Sometimes you just have to trust your instincts. My instincts are telling me to ask more questions, I said, crossing my arms. His grin widened. Good. Keep asking. But just remember, not everyone here is what they seem. Even the ones you think you can trust. The way he said it made my skin crawl. And for the first time, I wondered if Damon's game wasn't just about Elias. Maybe I was a pawn too, whether I liked it or not. I didn't know what Damon was planning, but one thing was clear. I was standing in the middle of a battlefield I didn't understand, and the players were far more dangerous than I'd realized. I wasn't snooping. Let's get that straight. I was walking, minding my own business if you count aimlessly wandering around a resort built on secrets as minding your own business. It was sunset, the kind of golden hour that made everything look softer and more romantic, which would have been great if I wasn't currently battling my inner chaos. The paths near the cliffside were quiet, just the whisper of waves and the occasional rustle of palm fronds. I'd spent most of the day replaying my awkward encounters with Elias, chilly stares, vague warnings, the usual and the increasingly cryptic conversations with Damon. For a place meant to relax you, Luna Haven was doing a great job at the opposite. Then I heard it, voices, low and tense, coming from somewhere down the path. My brain immediately screamed, "Turn around, Serena. Go back." But my legs, oh no, they had other plans. I crept closer, careful to stay in the shadows of the overhanging palms. The voices grew clearer, distinct now, though I couldn't place the second one. Damon's? Oh, I knew Damon's voice like I knew the lyrics to my favorite breakup anthem, smooth, velvety, and infuriatingly confident. The other voice was rough, like it had been scraped against gravel. Whoever it belonged to sounded annoyed, or angry, or both. Too close already, Gravel Voice said. This wasn't part of the deal. It's under control, Damon replied, his tone so calm it was almost smug. You worry too much. Worrying's what keeps us alive, the other guy shot back. You're playing with fire, Wolf. I flattened myself against the trunk of a tree, my heart hammering. Wolf. Definitely Damon. And what deal? What fire? Why did I feel like I was suddenly the main character in a really bad spy movie? I told you, Damon said, his voice quieter now but no less intense. I have it handled. Cain doesn't suspect a thing. Cain. As in Elias, my stomach twisted, the unease curling tighter. And the girl. Gravel Voice pressed. She's part of this too, isn't she? Oh no, 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 no. They weren't talking about me. They couldn't be. There were probably a dozen other girls at the resort, right? She's useful, Damon said, and I could practically hear the smirk in his voice. For now. For now? Excuse me. My fists clenched at my sides, but I stayed frozen, afraid to make a sound. She'll figure it out, Gravel Voice muttered. And when she does, she won't, Damon interrupted, his tone sharp and commanding. Not until it's too late. My breath caught. Too late for what? What exactly had I walked into? I must have shifted. Or maybe the universe decided it was time for me to get caught. Because the next thing I knew, a twig snapped beneath my foot. Loudly. The voices stopped. For a split second, I considered pretending to be a very lost tourist. Oh, don't mind me. Just out here enjoying the flora and fauna. But before I could execute that brilliant plan, Damon's voice cut through the silence. Serena, he called, his tone dripping with faux amusement. Care to join us? Crap. I stepped out from behind the tree, plastering on the most innocent expression I could manage. Damon stood there, all dark charm and casual menace, while Gravel Voice was exactly as intimidating as I'd imagined a burly guy with a scar running down his cheek and eyes that didn't blink enough. Hey, I said, waving awkwardly. Didn't mean to interrupt, whatever this is. Of course not, Damon said smoothly, his smile razor sharp. You were just exploring. Exactly, I said, pointing to the cliffs. Beautiful view. Great vibes. Love what you've done with the place. Gravel Voice shot Damon a look that said, Who is this lunatic? Damon, on the other hand, didn't take his eyes off me. Serena, he said, stepping closer. You really shouldn't wander too far from the marked paths. This island can be unpredictable. Noted, I said, my heart pounding as he closed the distance between us. His smile didn't waver, but there was something behind it now, something darker. "I'll walk you back," he said, his voice low. "Wouldn't want anything to happen to you." "Oh, I'm fine," I blurted, holding up my hands. "Really, I can find my way. I insist," Damon said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The walk back was painfully quiet, except for the occasional sound of waves and my own overthinking. Damon stayed close, his presence like a shadow I couldn't shake. "So," I said, trying to break the silence, "interesting friend you've got back there." Damon's smile returned, faint and unreadable. "Just an acquaintance. Nothing you need to worry about." "Right," I said, dragging the word out. "Because you've got it handled, right?" He stopped then, turning to face me. The fading sunlight caught the sharp angles of his face, casting half of it in shadow. "Exactly," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I've got it handled. And you don't need to ask questions you don't want answers to." I stared at him, trying to decide if that was a threat or just really bad advice. Probably both. "Good talk," I said finally, moving past him toward the main path. "Serena," he called after me, his tone lighter now. "Stay curious, but not too curious." I didn't look back. Because if I did, I wasn't sure if I'd see the Damon I thought I knew, or the one I'd just glimpsed, the one with secrets big enough to pull me under. Chapter 4. The evening started innocently enough. I was on the rooftop terrace, enjoying the view of the ocean as the stars blinked to life overhead. The salty breeze was doing wonders for my stress, which, at this point, could probably be bottled and sold as a high-grade anxiety supplement. Between Elias's frosty glares and Damon's cryptic flirtations, I was running out of mental bandwidth. "This is nice," I muttered to myself, sipping on something fruity that tasted like it should come with a warning label. Just me, the stars, and absolutely no drama. The universe, as it turns out, has a wicked sense of humor. The first sign of trouble was the howl. Not the romantic, soulful kind you'd hear in a movie montage, but a sharp, guttural sound that made my heart leap into my throat. It was followed by shouts, panicked, frantic shouts, and the unmistakable sound of something breaking. I set my drink down. "Okay, I spilled it, but let's not focus on that," and bolted toward the edge of the terrace. Below, the resort grounds were in chaos. Figures darted through the shadows, growls echoing against the walls as a lot of somethings tore through the carefully curated paradise. "Serena." Damon's voice cut through the noise, and I turned to see him racing toward me, looking every bit the dashing anti-hero. His shirt was slightly rumpled, his expression intense, and his hair was doing that artful disarray thing that only added to the drama. "Damon, what's going on?" I asked, my voice trembling more than I'd like. "Rogues," he said, grabbing my arm. "We have to get you somewhere safe." "Rogues?" The word buzzed in my brain like an alarm bell, though I barely had time to process it before Damon was pulling me toward the stairs. "Wait," I said, planting my feet. "What about the others?" "The guests, they'll be fine," he interrupted, his tone firm but oddly soothing. "Elias has it under control." Something about the way he said Elias's name made my stomach twist. "And where are we going?" I asked, my skepticism bubbling up despite the chaos. "To safety," he replied, his grip tightening ever so slightly. Trust me. It was a simple phrase, but it carried the weight of a command. And against my better judgment, or maybe because my judgment had decided to take a coffee break, I let him lead me. As we reached the beach, the scale of the attack became painfully clear. Shapes moved through the darkness, their eyes glowing faintly as they darted between the trees and the shore. I could hear snarls and the crash of bodies colliding, the sound raw and visceral. And then I saw him. Elias. He moved through the chaos like a force of nature, his movements precise and almost animalistic. He was fighting off two rogues at once, his shirt torn and his expression set in a way that sent a chill down my spine. For the first time I saw the alpha in him, the raw power and control that made everyone else fall in line. Damon followed my gaze, his lips curling into a faint smirk. "See what I mean? He doesn't need your help. He's got this." But I started, but Damon cut me off, stepping in front of me. "Serena, listen to me," he said, his tone softer now, almost pleading. "Elias will handle the rogues. Right now, you need to focus on staying safe. That's all that matters." There was something about his voice, the way his dark eyes bore into mine, that made me hesitate. He was right, wasn't he? I wasn't a fighter. What could I do, other than get in the way? But then I looked back at Elias. The determination in his eyes, the way he put himself between the rogues, and the packet wasn't just duty. It was personal. "He doesn't trust you, you know," Damon said quietly, pulling my attention back to him. "He never has. He's too wrapped up in his own guilt to see what's right in front of him." My chest tightened. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the truth," Damon said, stepping closer. His hand brushed against mine, and the contact sent a strange warmth through me. "Elias will never see you as anything more than an outsider. But me, I see you, Serena. I see what you're capable of." Before I could respond, a deafening growl cut through the air, and suddenly Elias was there, his presence as sharp and overwhelming as a thunderstorm. His silver-blue eyes locked on Damon, and for a moment, I thought the ground itself might shake under the weight of his fury. "Get away from her," Elias snarled, his voice low and dangerous. Damon's smirk returned, slow and infuriatingly smug. "Relax, Cain. I was just keeping her safe." Elias didn't reply. He didn't have to. The tension between them was so thick, it felt like the air had turned to stone. I half expected one of them to lunge, but instead, Elias turned to me, his expression hard. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer now. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "Good," he said, his gaze shifting back to Damon. "Because this isn't over." With that, he strode back into the fray, leaving Damon and me standing in the aftermath of whatever storm had just passed between them. As the chaos slowly subsided, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was caught between two forces I didn't fully understand. Damon, with his charm and his secrets, and Elias, with his power and his walls. One thing was certain, the attack was just the beginning. And if I wasn't careful, I might end up as collateral damage in a battle that went far beyond anything I'd imagined. The chaos had finally settled well. As much as it could when your evening involved snarling rogues and people throwing themselves into the kind of fights you only see in action movies. The resort grounds looked like a very exclusive war zone, overturned furniture, torn palm fronds, and scorch marks on the path where someone had apparently decided that fire was a valid battle tactic. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. And then there was Elias Cain, standing in the middle of it all like some battle-worn general surveying his kingdom. His shirt was torn, dirt streaked his arms, and a faint scratch ran along his cheek, but his expression? Calm. Collected. Alpha Y, if that's a word. If it's not, it should be. I watched him issue orders to his pack with an authority that made my stomach flip in a way I definitely wasn't ready to examine. His voice was firm but steady, his commands delivered like they were the final word on the subject. Spoiler, they were. "Get the injured to the infirmary," he said, gesturing to a group of pack members who were still limping but otherwise functional. "Secure the perimeter. And for the love of everything, someone find out how the rogues got past the wards." His pack moved with military precision, scattering to carry out his orders without hesitation. It was impressive. No scratch that it was downright awe-inspiring. Elias wasn't just a leader, he was their leader, and it showed in every glance and nod they gave him. "Alpha Cain," someone called, rushing up to him. "We've secured the eastern boundary." Elias nodded. "Good. Double-check it." "And don't let anyone you're staring," Damon's voice interrupted, low and far too close to my ear. I flinched, turning to find him standing there, looking entirely too smug for someone who'd just been through a literal rogue attack. His shirt was rumpled, his hair was a mess, and there was a faint scrape along his jaw that should have made him look less composed. It didn't. "I'm not staring," I said quickly, folding my arms. "I'm observing." Damon smirked. "Observing? Interesting word choice." "Don't start," I muttered, turning back toward Elias, who was now speaking with one of the healers. "He's just good at what he does, that's all." "Good," Damon echoed, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Serena, he barks orders like he's auditioning for a military drama." "Maybe," I said, narrowing my eyes at him. "But those orders got everyone out alive, didn't they?" Damon's smirk faltered, just for a second, before returning in full force. "Careful," he said, stepping closer. "You're starting to sound like one of his loyal followers." I didn't reply, mostly because I wasn't sure he was wrong. As the evening dragged on, Damon's presence went from vaguely charming to downright suffocating. He hovered, constantly finding excuses to check on me or steer me away from conversations with the pack. At first, I thought it was sweet protective, even. But then it started to feel off. "Serena," he said, as I tried to join a group of pack members discussing the attack. "You don't need to involve yourself in this. Let them handle it." "Handle what?" I asked, pulling my arm out of his grasp. "They're just talking." "Exactly," he said, his tone sharper now. "And it's not your place to question them." "My place? My place?" I wasn't sure what annoyed me more, his condescending tone or the fact that he clearly thought I was some delicate flower who couldn't handle a few bruised egos. "Damon," I said slowly, "if you're going to try to control me, you should know it's not going to end well for you." His jaw tightened, but he covered it with a laugh. "I'm not trying to control you, Serena. I'm trying to protect you." "From what?" I shot back. "A group discussion about boundary wards?" "Yeah, super dangerous." He stepped closer, his dark eyes glinting. "You don't understand how things work here." "Maybe not," I said, standing my ground. "But I'm trying to figure it out, and I don't need you deciding what I can and can't do." For a moment, we just stared at each other, the tension thick enough to cut with a butter knife. And then, without another word, Damon turned and stalked off, leaving me standing there feeling equal parts triumphant and unnerved. I found myself drawn back to Elias, who was still in the thick of things, organizing cleanup efforts and checking on his pack. He moved with a quiet confidence that made people listen not out of fear, but respect. As I watched him, a strange thought crossed my mind. Damon's charm might be intoxicating, but Elias's steadiness was grounding. Where Damon pulled you in with promises of excitement and danger, Elias was the anchor that kept you from drifting too far. "Serena," Elias said suddenly, his voice pulling me out of my thoughts. He was standing just a few feet away now, his sharp eyes scanning me like he was trying to figure out what exactly I was doing here. "Yes," I said, feeling oddly self-conscious under his gaze. "You should get some rest," he said, his tone gentler than I expected. "It's been a long night." "Rest," I repeated, nodding. "Right. Good plan." He didn't smile, but there was a flicker of something softer in his expression. "We'll talk tomorrow." And just like that, he was gone, leaving me to process a whirlwind of emotions I wasn't entirely ready to name. As I made my way back to my villa, one thought lingered in my mind. Elias might not wear his heart on his sleeve, but there was something about him, something solid and unshakable that I couldn't ignore. And Damon? For the first time, his charm didn't feel like a safety net. It felt like a trap. Chapter 5. By the next morning, Luna Haven had settled into something resembling calm. The battle from the night before was just a memory, though the overturned furniture and claw marks on a few trees told a different story. My own brain felt like one of those trees scratched up and wobbling from everything I'd seen. But of course, peace was too much to ask for. I walked into the main pavilion, still nursing my second cup of coffee, only to feel the tension in the air hit me like a slap. Pack members clustered in small groups, their voices low and hushed, their glances darting around like they were waiting for something or someone to explode. "Good morning," I offered, the question mark in my tone doing all the heavy lifting. No one answered. "Okay then." I clutched my mug a little tighter and pretended not to notice the way the conversation stopped as I passed by. It was like high school all over again, except the stakes were higher, and I was pretty sure a few of these people could throw me across the room, if they felt like it. I spotted Cora near one of the windows, her auburn curls catching the sunlight, and made a beeline for her. If anyone could tell me what was going on, it was Cora. She always had the gossip. "Why does it feel like I walked into a courtroom drama?" I asked, leaning in close. She gave me a tight smile, her usual warmth dimmed. "Things are tense." "I can see that," I said, gesturing to the room at large. "Did I miss a memo? Is this like pack politics day?" Cora sighed. "Something like that. The attack last night stirred things up, and people are starting to question Elias's leadership." My stomach dropped. "Why? He literally saved half the pack." Yeah, but some people think he could have prevented the attack entirely, she said, lowering her voice. And Damon's not exactly helping. Of course he wasn't. Speak of the devil or the wolf in designer clothing and he shall appear. Damon strode into the pavilion like he owned the place, his usual smug grin firmly in place. His dark eyes scanned the room, and I could feel the shift as he moved. Conversation stopped. All eyes turned to him. Good morning, everyone, he said, his tone as smooth as a glass of top-shelf whiskey. How's the cleanup going? It's going fine, Elias said, appearing in the doorway like some kind of avenging angel. His voice was steady, but the undertone of warning was impossible to miss. Damon's smile widened. Good to hear. You know, it's a shame we didn't see this coming. Maybe with a little more foresight enough, Elias snapped, his eyes flashing. Now's not the time to point fingers. Oh, I'm not pointing fingers, Damon said, spreading his hands like he was the picture of innocence. I'm just saying, leadership is about more than reacting. It's about anticipating. The room went dead silent. My stomach clenched as I glanced between the two of them. It wasn't just the words, it was the way Damon said them, like he was sliding a knife into Elias's side with a smile. Damon, I interjected, trying to keep my voice steady. Maybe we should all focus on, fixing things instead of assigning blame. His gaze flicked to me, and for a moment, I saw something cold beneath the charm. You're right, Serena, he said, his tone dripping with honey. We should focus on fixing things, starting with accountability. Enough, Elias said again, his voice low but deadly serious. This isn't a debate. Damon held his gaze for a moment longer before finally shrugging, his grin intact. Of course, you're the alpha, after all. It sounded like respect, but it wasn't. It was a challenge, plain and simple. And judging by the way some of the pack members exchanged glances, it wasn't going unnoticed. The rest of the day felt like walking on a tightrope over a pit of snapping jaws. Everywhere I turned, there were whispers and sidelong glances, the tension simmering just below the surface. It was like being in the middle of a family argument where everyone was too polite to yell but not polite enough to pretend they weren't mad. By lunchtime, I couldn't take it anymore. I cornered Cora by the pool, my frustration bubbling over. Okay, spill. What's going on? She hesitated, her usual sunny demeanor replaced by something more cautious. The pack's splitting, she said finally. Some people are starting to side with Damon. They think he's right, that Elias is too stuck in his ways to protect us. That's ridiculous, I said, though the knot in my stomach didn't agree. Elias is literally holding this place together. Not everyone sees it that way, she said quietly. And Damon's good at planting doubts. Yeah, I've noticed, I muttered. But why? What's his endgame? Cora looked away, and that's when it hit me, she didn't know. Or worse, she did, but she didn't want to say it out loud. By the time the sun started to set, I was no closer to figuring out what Damon was playing at, or why it felt like I was somehow a part of it. Everywhere I went, I felt eyes on me, the weight of the pack's judgment pressing down like a storm cloud. Serena, Damon called, catching up to me as I walked back toward my villa. He fell into step beside me, his grin as disarming as ever. You look stressed. Everything okay? Fine, I said shortly, though my tone probably said otherwise. He chuckled. If you ever need someone to talk to, someone who actually listens, I'm always here. Thanks, I said, keeping my gaze straight ahead. But I think I've got it covered. Do you? He asked, his voice softening just enough to send a shiver down my spine. Because it seems like Elias is distracted, maybe too distracted to see what's really going on. I stopped, turning to face him. What are you trying to say, Damon? I'm saying you deserve better than being a pawn in someone else's game, he said, his eyes locking onto mine. You're smarter than that. The words hit harder than they should have. And for a moment, I felt the pull of his charm, the way he made you feel like the only person in the world. But then I remembered the look on Elias's face when he'd stood in the middle of the chaos, steady and unshakable. I'll keep that in mind, I said finally, stepping away. Thanks for the advice. As I walked back to my villa, Damon's words lingered in my mind like smoke. But so did the image of Elias standing firm in the storm. And for the first time, I started to wonder, was Damon trying to protect me, or was he just trying to win? The problem with secrets is that they have this nasty habit of spilling out at the worst possible time, like when you're finally starting to feel semi-normal after a week of chaos. That's exactly what happened to me. One minute, I was walking through the tranquil gardens, pretending not to notice the suspicious glares from pack members. The next, I was sitting across from Cora in a quiet corner of the dining pavilion, trying to wrap my head around what she'd just said. "Wait," I said, holding up a hand. "Run that by me again, slower, with fewer metaphors." Cora sighed, stirring her iced tea with the kind of exaggerated patience that made me want to throw my own drink at her. "It's not that complicated, Serena. The mating bond is, well, it's a connection. A really intense connection." Aha. I stared at her, waiting for the other shoe to drop. And it's not something that happens by accident," she said, lowering her voice. "It's deliberate, intentional, magical." "Magical," I echoed, laughing nervously. "Cora, I think you've been spending too much time in the sun." She gave me a look, a very serious, very not joking look that made my stomach twist. "It's real, Serena, and it's permanent." The word permanent hit me like a rogue wave. I leaned back in my chair, gripping the edge of the table as my brain did its best impression of a short-circuiting computer. "So, what you're saying is Damon and I have a bond," Cora finished for me. "A partial one, at least." My laugh came out strangled. "Great, just great. Because if there's one thing I needed more of in my life, it's partial bonds with cryptic, overly charming wolves." By the time I made it back to my villa, my brain was officially fried. A mating bond. With Damon? It didn't make sense. Okay, fine. It kind of made sense. He was annoyingly attractive, and there was definitely something magnetic about him. But permanent? No, thank you. I paced the small living room, my thoughts spiraling. A bond wasn't just an emotional connection, it was deeper than that. According to Cora, it was primal, instinctual, and unbreakable, which, as someone who valued her independence, was about as appealing as a lifetime supply of wet socks. And then there was the question of why. Why would Damon initiate something like this? What did he want from me? And why did it feel like I'd walked straight into a trap I couldn't escape? Of course, Damon chose that exact moment to show up. He didn't knock. He just strolled in like he owned the place, leaning casually against the doorframe with his usual smirk firmly in place. "Serena," he said, his voice smooth as ever. "You look conflicted." "You think?" I shot back, crossing my arms. Care to explain why I just learned about this whole mating bond situation from Cora and not, "Oh, I don't know you." His smirk faltered, just for a second, before returning in full force. "It didn't seem like the right time." "The right time?" I repeated, my voice rising. "When exactly would have been the right time, Damon? After I'd signed up for a lifetime of vague answers and possessive glares?" "Possessive?" he asked, raising a brow. "I'm not possessive," I snorted. "Oh, please. You've been hovering over me like a jealous bodyguard since day one." He stepped closer, his dark eyes locking onto mine. "Maybe that's because I care about you, Serena. Did you ever think of that?" "Or," I countered, holding my ground, "maybe it's because you're using me as part of some scheme to undermine Elias." His expression darkened, and for the first time I saw something flicker in his eyes, anger, maybe, or frustration. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" I shot back, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. "Because from where I'm standing it looks a lot like you're playing a game, and I'm just a piece on your board." The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging heavy in the air. Damon didn't respond right away, and for a moment I thought I'd finally gotten through to him. But then he stepped even closer, his voice low and dangerous. "You don't understand, Serena," he said. "This bond, it's not just about me. It's about us. Whether you like it or not, we're connected now. And that connection, it's not something you can just walk away from." My heart pounded in my chest, and I hated the way his words made my stomach flip. Because as much as I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, I couldn't shake the pull I felt toward him, the same pull that had drawn me in the first night we met. But then I thought about Elias, about his steady presence, his quiet strength, and the way he'd looked at me like I was more than just a pawn in some elaborate game. "I need time," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "To figure this out. To figure you out." Damon's gaze softened, but there was still something predatory lingering in his expression. "Take all the time you need," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "But don't forget, Serena, this bond isn't going anywhere. And neither am I." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving me standing in the middle of the room, my emotions tangled in a web I couldn't escape. Trapped, confused and conflicted, I sank onto the couch, staring at the door he'd just walked through. Because if there was one thing I knew for certain, it was this: Damon wasn't just part of my story. He was rewriting it, and I wasn't sure how it would end. The moon hung low over the ocean, casting silver ripples across the waves. It was one of those nights where the world felt softer, quieter, like it had exhaled after a long day. I walked along the beach, the cool sand sinking under my feet, trying to clear my head. Between rogue attacks, pack politics, and Damon's infuriating smirk, I was one "how are you holding up?" away from losing it. Couldn't sleep either? The voice startled me, deep and familiar. I turned to see Elias a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, his silhouette cutting a sharp figure against the moonlit backdrop. Even with his stoic demeanor, the soft glow made him look almost approachable. Almost. I wasn't exactly in the mood for bedtime stories, I quipped, hoping humor would mask the fact that my heart had just done a little flip at the sight of him. His lips twitched, but the almost smile didn't last. "Mind if I join you?" "Sure," I said, shrugging like it wasn't a big deal. Internally, though, my brain was already spiraling. "Play it cool, Serena. It's just a walk. Nothing romantic about sand and moonlight." Oh, who am I kidding? We walked in silence for a bit, the waves lapping at the shore. As I tried to think of something clever to say, he beat me to it. "You've been spending a lot of time with Damon." There it was. The comment hung in the air, heavy and loaded, and I let out a sigh that felt like it came from my soul. "Is this where you tell me to stay away from the bad boy?" "If you know he's a bad boy," Elias countered, his voice low and steady, "why are you letting him get so close?" "Touch. Maybe I like a little danger," I said, shooting him a sideways glance. "Keeps things interesting." "Danger isn't interesting, Serena," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "It's reckless. And Damon? He's dangerous in ways you don't understand." I stopped walking, turning to face him. "Then help me understand, Elias, because all I'm getting from everyone is vague warnings and cryptic looks. What's his deal?" For a moment, he hesitated, his gaze shifting to the horizon. "Damon has a history," he said finally. "He's not loyal to anyone but himself. He manipulates, undermines, does whatever it takes to get what he wants. And right now, he wants you." My chest tightened at his words, but I wasn't sure if it was from fear or something else. "Why me?" Elias met my eyes, his expression unreadable. "Because you're important. To him, to the pack, and to me." The last part hung in the air, and I wasn't sure if it was the words or the way he said them that made my heart skip a beat. "To you?" I echoed, my voice quieter now. His jaw tightened, like he was bracing himself for something. "You don't realize the effect you have on people, Serena. You come in and everything shifts. People notice." "I notice." I opened my mouth to respond, though honestly, I had no idea what I was going to say, but then he stepped closer, his eyes locking onto mine, in a way that made the rest of the world fade. "There's a reason I've kept my distance," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "You make it difficult to stay focused." My breath caught. This wasn't just about Damon anymore. This was about us. Whatever unspoken thing had been brewing between us since day one was finally bubbling to the surface, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. "Elias," I started, but my voice faltered. "I'm not saying this to make things harder for you," he said, his tone earnest. "I'm saying it because I need you to know that whatever Damon's telling you, whatever he's promising, it's not real. He'll only hurt you." The sincerity in his voice made my chest ache. I wanted to believe him, but Damon's pull was still there, tangled up in the mating bond I hadn't asked for and didn't know how to untangle. "Why do you care so much?" I asked, my voice soft. His eyes searched mine, and for a moment, I thought he might not answer. But then he said, "Because I care about you." The words hit me like a wave, and I didn't have time to process them before Elias stepped even closer. The space between us vanished, and suddenly I was very aware of how tall he was. How his broad shoulders seemed to block out the rest of the world. His presence was overwhelming, but not in the way Damon's was. This felt steady, grounding, like I could lean into it and never fall. The ocean breeze tugged at my hair, and for a split second, I thought he might lean in. He didn't. Instead, he held my gaze, his intensity pinning me in place. "Serena," he said softly, his voice full of something I couldn't quite name. "I don't want to lose you. Not to him. Not to anyone." My heart was doing somersaults now, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to run or stay rooted right where I was. "You're not going to lose me," I said, though the words felt flimsy under the weight of everything unsaid between us. He reached out, his hand brushing against mine in a gesture so small, it shouldn't have meant anything. But it did. It sent a shiver down my spine, and suddenly the air felt too thick, too charged. "Good," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "because I don't know what I'd do if I did." The moment stretched, the sound of the waves fading into the background as I stood there, caught between his steady presence and the storm of my own emotions. And just like that, the walls I'd been holding up started to crack. Because if there was one thing I knew for sure, it was this: Elias Cain wasn't just an alpha. He was my alpha. And that scared me more than anything Damon Wolf could ever do. Chapter 6. You know that moment when everything clicks. Like all the little clues you've been tripping over suddenly line up and slap you in the face with the truth. That was me, standing in the middle of my villa, staring at the torn scrap of fabric clenched in my hand. Damon's shirt fabric, to be precise. And where did I find it? Clinging to the edge of the rogue's hideout like it had no idea it was about to betray its owner. I knew he was sketchy, but alliance with rogue sketchy. That was a whole new level. "Oh, Damon," I muttered under my breath, pacing the length of the room. "You really went for the full Bond villain arc, didn't you?" A knock on the door interrupted my spiral. I swung it open without thinking, and there he was, the man of the hour. Damon Wolf, all dark charm and infuriating confidence, leaning against the doorframe like he hadn't just been exposed as a traitor. "Serena," he said, his voice warm and smooth, "you've been avoiding me." "I've been busy," I replied, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. I wasn't about to tip my hand just yet. "Busy," he echoed, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Anything I should know about?" "Funny you should ask," I said, stepping back and crossing my arms. "Why don't you come in? I think we need to talk." He stepped inside, the casual swagger in his walk making my blood boil. I let him settle into the room before I turned to face him, holding up the incriminating fabric like it was a winning lottery ticket. "Recognize this?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. His expression barely flickered. Barely. But I caught at the smallest crack in his cool facade. "Should I?" "Oh, I think you should," I said, stepping closer, "because I found it near the eastern cliffs. You know, the same cliffs where the rogues were hiding during the attack." Serena started, but I cut him off. "Don't," I snapped, my heart pounding. "Don't you dare try to talk your way out of this. I know you've been working with them." "And what exactly do you think you know?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "I know you're a liar," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "I know you've been using me to get to Elias and the pack. And I know you've been playing both sides like this is some kind of game." He stared at me, his expression unreadable, and for a moment I thought he might deny it, but then his lips curved into a slow, almost amused smile. "And if I am," he said softly, stepping closer, "if I've been playing a game, Serena, what difference does it make? The bond between us is still real." "Real?" I laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "You call this real? Damon, you manipulated me? You bonded with me for your own agenda? That's not real. That's control." For the first time, his charm faltered. His eyes darkened, his jaw tightening as he stepped even closer. "You think I don't care about you. You don't," I said, meeting his gaze. "You care about winning, about power, about whatever scheme you're running with the rogues. But me, I was just a convenient pawn." "That's not true," he said, his voice softening. "You mean more to me than you realize." "Stop," I said, holding up a hand. "Just stop. You don't get to twist this into something it's not. You don't get to make me doubt what I already know." "And what do you know?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know you're not the person I thought you were," I said, my throat tightening. "I know you've lied to me from the start. And I know that whatever bond we have, it's not real, not the way it's supposed to be." For a moment, the room was silent, the tension between us crackling like static electricity. And then, just when I thought he might actually apologize, he smiled. A slow, chilling smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "You're stronger than I gave you credit for," he said, his tone almost admiring. "But strength won't save you, Serena. Not from this." Something inside me snapped. I took a deep breath, steadying myself as I looked him in the eye. "You're wrong," I said, my voice steady. "Strength will save me, because I'm not going to let you control me anymore." He stepped closer, his smile fading. "You can't fight the bond, Serena. It's a part of you now." "Maybe," I said, my heart pounding. "But I can fight you." With that, I turned and walked out the door, leaving Damon standing there, his expression a mix of frustration and something I couldn't quite name. Relief washed over me as the cool night air hit my face. And for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. Because no matter how tangled the bond was, I wasn't going to let it define me. Damon's games were over, and I was done being a pawn. The cliffs were quiet, the kind of eerie quiet that screamed something bad is about to happen. The moon hung high above, casting a pale glow over the hidden path that led to the resort's cliffside caves. I wasn't supposed to be here. Actually, if I had a dime for every place I wasn't supposed to be at Luna Haven, I'd be sipping cocktails on a private yacht right now. But here I was, sneakers crunching against gravel as I descended into the shadows. Damon was waiting for me. I knew it. I could feel the pull, warm and electric, like a thread tied between us, tugging me closer with every step. It wasn't romantic or exciting anymore. It was suffocating. I tightened my grip on the flashlight in my hand, the beam cutting through the darkness as I stepped into the cave. The air was cool and damp, the faint sound of dripping water echoing against the walls. And there he was, standing in the center of the cavern like some villain from a gothic novel. "Serena," Damon said, his voice echoing in the space. "I was wondering when you'd find me." "Don't flatter yourself," I shot back, stopping a few feet away. "You're not that hard to track down. Just follow the trail of bad decisions." His smirk was instant, sharp and infuriating. "You're fisty tonight." "Yeah, well, being betrayed will do that to a girl," I said, crossing my arms. "Care to explain why you're working with the rogues? Or are you going to keep dodging the question like the charming coward you are?" He tilted his head, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "You always make things so dramatic." "It's not betrayal, Serena. It's strategy. The pack needs a change, and I'm the one who's going to give it to them." "By teaming up with people who tried to kill us?" I asked, incredulous. "Great plan, Damon. Really inspiring leadership material." "You don't understand," he said, his voice softening. He stepped closer, the pull between us intensifying. "This bond between us, it's more than you think. Together we could." "Don't," I said sharply, cutting him off. "Don't you dare use the bond to manipulate me. Not again." And the air grew heavier, thick with tension as Damon moved closer. I could feel the bond pulsing between us, like a living thing desperate to pull me under. My chest tightened, the familiar warmth washing over me, but I dug my heels in literally and figuratively. "You feel it, don't you?" he said, his voice low and coaxing. "You can't fight it, Serena. The bond is part of you now. You know what else is part of me?" I snapped, taking a step back. "Free will," he laughed, the sound dark and low. "You can't resist forever. Watch me," I said, my voice trembling slightly. I closed my eyes, reaching for the strange, calming energy I discovered deep inside myself. It had always been there, faint and elusive, but now it felt like my only lifeline. I focused on it, letting it expand, pushing back against the suffocating pull of the bond. When I opened my eyes, Damon's smirk had faded. "What are you doing?" "Breaking free," I said simply. The cave seemed to pulse around us, the bond fighting back as I pushed harder. My head throbbed, my body shaking as I poured every ounce of energy into severing the connection. Damon reached out, his expression twisting between anger and desperation. "Serena, stop," he barked, his voice echoing through the cavern. "You don't know what you're doing." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing," I said through gritted teeth. I'm saving myself. With one final push, the bond shattered. The warmth vanished, replaced by a sharp, cold emptiness that left me gasping for air. I stumbled, my knees hitting the rocky floor as my vision blurred. Damon stared at me, his chest heaving, his expression unreadable. "You don't understand what you've done?" he said quietly. "I've done what you were too afraid to do," I said, my voice hoarse. "I chose freedom." As the weight of the bond lifted, exhaustion slammed into me like a tidal wave. My limbs felt heavy, my head spinning, but I managed to push myself to my feet. Damon didn't stop me. He just stood there, watching as I turned and made my way toward the cave entrance. "Serena," he called after me, his voice softer now. "This isn't over." I paused, glancing back over my shoulder. "No," I said, "it's not. But next time, you won't be holding the strings." The moonlight hit me as I stepped outside, the cool night air rushing over my face. I was drained, physically and emotionally, but for the first time in days, I felt like myself again. Because no matter what came next, no matter how much Damon tried to twist things, I was free. And that, more than anything, was worth the fight. I stumbled out of the bond-breaking haze, just as the sound of footsteps and low growls echoed down the cavern. For a split second, I thought it was my head playing tricks on me, because clearly I hadn't been through enough tonight. But no. It wasn't a trick. It was the cavalry, and leading them. Elias. Of course. He stormed into the cave like a one-man hurricane, his silver blue eyes scanning in the scene in an instant. Behind him, the pack fanned out, their expressions a mix of fury and determination. Damon, who had been looming in his usual "I'm the villain and I know it" pose, straightened at the sight of them. "Well, this is cozy," Damon said, his voice smooth but edged with steel. "A little late to the party, aren't we?" "Damon," Elias said, his tone low and deadly. "Step away from her." I blinked, realizing I was still standing too close to Damon for anyone's comfort. Not that I'd been given much choice in the matter, what with him looming and all. Damon chuckled, the sound dark and humorless. "You're predictable, Cain. Always rushing in to play the hero. And you're always scheming," Elias shot back. "But this ends tonight." "Oh, I don't think so," Damon said, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. "You see, I have a knack for slipping out of tight spots." The tension in the air was thick enough to chew on, and I had the distinct feeling that things were about to get very messy. Damon's smirk widened as he stepped back, his posture shifting into something more predatory. "Do you really want to do this?" he asked, his gaze flicking between Elias and the pack. "Because I don't think your little team here is ready for what I have in store." "Try me," Elias growled, his voice low and rumbling in a way that sent shivers down my spine. And then it was chaos. Damon moved first, faster than I thought possible, and the cave erupted into a whirlwind of snarls, claws, and flashing movements. Pack members lunged at him, but he was slippery ducking, weaving, and fighting back with a precision that was terrifyingly elegant. Elias didn't wait. He threw himself into the fray, his strength and speed matching Damon's in a way that made it clear why he was the alpha. The two of them clashed like forces of nature, each blow reverberating through the cavern like thunder. I pressed myself against the cave wall, my heart pounding as I tried to process the scene in front of me. Damon and Elias were a blur of motion, their movements too fast to follow. Every growl and snarl made my stomach twist, and I found myself gripping the rocky wall, like it was the only thing keeping me upright. "Serena, get out of here." Elias barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I'm not leaving you," I shouted back, though the quiver in my voice probably undermined the heroic effect. Damon laughed, a wild, sharp sound that echoed through the cave. "Hear that, Cain? She's loyal. Too bad you don't deserve it." Elias didn't respond, not with words, anyway. His fist connected with Damon's jaw, the force sending him stumbling back. For a moment, I thought he might actually win, but then Damon recovered, his smirk still intact. "You always think you're better than me," Damon hissed, his voice dripping with venom. "But you're wrong, Cain. You're just another pawn. And you're a coward," Elias shot back, "running when things don't go your way." As if on cue, Damon made his move. He feinted toward Elias, then darted past the pack members trying to corner him. It was like watching a fox slip out of a trap, frustratingly clever and infuriatingly graceful. "Damon," I shouted, but he didn't look back. He paused at the mouth of the cave, his silhouette illuminated by the moonlight. "This isn't over," he called, his voice calm despite the chaos behind him. "I'll be back, Serena. And next time, things will be different." Before anyone could stop him, he disappeared into the night, leaving nothing but his words and the sound of my hammering heartbeat. The cave fell silent, the tension slowly dissipating as the pack regrouped. Elias stood at the center of it all, his chest heaving, his expression a mix of frustration and relief. "Are you okay?" he asked, his gaze locking onto mine. "Define okay," I said, my voice shaky but laced with attempted humor. "Because if it means emotionally and physically wrecked, then yeah, I'm great." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, but it didn't last. "We'll talk later," he said, his voice softer now. "For now, let's get you out of here." I nodded, too drained to argue. As we left the cave, the weight of Damon's escape hung heavy in the air. He was gone for now, but his promise lingered, a reminder that this battle was far from over. And deep down, I knew one thing for sure: the storm was just beginning. The villa was quiet, save for the soft crash of waves in the distance, and the occasional rustle of the breeze against the curtains. I was curled up on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the untouched cup of tea in my hands. My body felt like I'd just run a marathon barefoot, uphill, in the rain. Emotionally, I wasn't faring much better. "Drink," Elias said, his voice low but firm. He stood a few feet away, arms crossed, his silver blue eyes locked on me like I was a flight risk. "I'm fine," I muttered, though the tremor in my hands probably said otherwise. "You're not fine," he countered, his tone softening slightly. "You're stubborn." "Same difference?" I shot back, though it lacked my usual spark. He sighed, crossing the room to sit beside me. The couch dipped under his weight, and suddenly the space felt smaller, warmer. He took the cup from my hands and set it on the table, his movements slow and deliberate. For someone who usually radiated "do not mess with me" energy, he was surprisingly gentle. "Serena," he said, his voice quieter now, "you don't have to pretend with me. Not tonight." The words hit harder than I expected. I blinked, my throat tightening as the weight of the evening pressed down on me. "I'm trying," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But it's a lot, Elias, it's too much." He didn't say anything at first. Instead, he leaned back, his gaze fixed on me like he was trying to piece together a puzzle. "You've been through hell," he said finally. "No one expects you to handle it all on your own." "I do," I said, forcing a laugh. "It's kind of my thing, stubborn, remember." He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You don't have to be strong all the time, Serena." "Not with me." My heart did a little flip at that, but I tried to play it cool. "Is this the part where you tell me I'm safe now? That you'll handle everything and I should just what? Relax?" "If I thought you'd actually listen, maybe," he said, his tone wry. "But you'd fight me on it?" "You're not wrong," I admitted, a small smile tugging at my lips despite myself. "Then how about this?" he said, shifting slightly to face me. "I'm here. Whatever you need, whenever you need it, I'm here." It wasn't the words that got me. It was the way he said them, steady and sure, like a promise carved in stone. For someone who usually held people at arm's length, Elias had a way of making you feel like you were the only thing that mattered in the world. "Why do you do that?" I asked, my voice softer now. "Do what?" "Act like I'm worth all this trouble," I said, gesturing vaguely. "You could have let me walk away. Saved yourself a lot of headaches." His eyes softened, and for the first time, I saw something in them that made my chest tighten. "You're worth more than you realize," he said simply. "And if you think you're a headache, you haven't spent enough time around my pack." I laughed, the sound a little shaky but real. "That bad, huh?" "Worse," he said, the faintest smile playing at his lips. "But you're different." The words hung in the air, heavy and meaningful, and I felt my cheeks heat under his gaze. For a moment, I wondered if he might lean closer if I wanted him to. The thought made my pulse quicken, and I hated how much I didn't hate it. He didn't move, but his presence was enough. Solid, grounding, the kind of comfort I hadn't realized I needed until now. I let out a shaky breath, leaning back against the cushions and letting the silence stretch between us. "Thank you," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "For what?" "For this," I said, gesturing vaguely again. "For not letting me fall apart. You're stronger than you think, Serena," he said, his tone gentle. "But you don't have to be strong alone." Something about the way he said it made my chest ache. And I found myself leaning toward him without meaning to. He didn't pull away. Instead, he reached out, his hand brushing against mine in a gesture so small, it shouldn't have meant anything, but it did. For the first time, the pull between us didn't feel like a question. It felt like an answer. And while I wasn't ready to name it just yet, I knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. Chapter 7. The aftermath of Damon's dramatic exit was like the day after a wedding if the wedding had involved snarling rogues, near-death experiences, and absolutely no cake. The pack was busy cleaning up both the literal and metaphorical mess, and somehow, I'd become the unofficial therapist/pep squad leader of the group. "Serena," Cora said, flopping onto the couch beside me in the pavilion, her hair still damp from the ocean. "I need you to tell me I didn't look ridiculous when I tried to tackle that rogue last night." "You want honesty or moral support?" I asked, raising a brow. "Both," she said, giving me a hopeful look. "You looked determined?" I said diplomatically. Like someone who'd absolutely win in a fight with a slightly aggressive coconut. Her groan was music to my ears, and I couldn't help but laugh. It wasn't much, but moments like these were exactly what the pack needed, what I needed. After everything that had happened, finding ways to bring them together felt like the least I could do. The weird thing about healing was how slow and messy it was. Everyone had their own way of dealing with what happened. Some buried themselves in work. Others vented over long walks along the beach. And me, I played mediator, cheerleader, and occasionally referee. "I didn't sign up for this," I muttered to Elias one evening as I watched two pack members argue over who got the last mango from the buffet. "Yes, you did," he said without missing a beat, his lips twitching into a rare smile. "The moment you walked through those doors." I rolled my eyes but couldn't help smiling back. "You're impossible." "And you're indispensable," he countered, his tone softening. It was moments like that, small, quiet moments, that made me realize something had shifted between us. It wasn't just about the pack anymore. It was about us. About this pull we couldn't quite explain, but didn't really want to fight. It happened one night, under the same moonlight that had seen us through so many tense moments. The beach was quiet, the waves lapping at the shore in a soothing rhythm as we walked side by side. "Do you ever miss it?" I asked, breaking the silence. "Being on your own, I mean." Elias glanced at me, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but then I think about what I've built here, what I've found." I stopped walking, turning to face him. "And what have you found?" His gaze locked onto mine, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. "You," he said simply. My chest tightened, a strange mix of emotions washing over me. "Elias, He stepped closer, cutting off my words with the kind of intensity that made my heart race. "You don't have to say anything," he said, his voice low. "I just need you to know. Whatever happens next, whatever this bond means, I'm all in." The pull between us was undeniable now, a warmth that started in my chest and spread through my entire body. It wasn't like the false bond with Damon. This was deeper, stronger, and completely overwhelming. I reached out, my fingers brushing against his, and the moment our hands touched, the bond snapped into place. It was like a jolt of electricity, followed by a wave of pure, unfiltered connection. For the first time, I didn't feel torn or trapped. I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "Completely," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. I smiled, stepping closer until there was barely any space between us. "Good," I said, "because so am I." The bond changed everything, but it didn't feel like a chain. It felt like freedom, like I'd finally found the missing piece I didn't know I was searching for. And as the pack began to heal, so did I. "You're glowing," Cora teased one afternoon, nudging me as we sat by the pool. "Am I?" I asked, pretending to check my reflection in the water. "Must be the humidity." "Sure," she said, rolling her eyes. "Or maybe it's the fact that our alpha hasn't stopped looking at you like you hung the moon." I glanced over at Elias, who was talking with a group of pack members near the cabanas. When his gaze flicked to mine, the warmth in his eyes was enough to make my cheeks flush. "Maybe," I said, smiling softly. "But don't tell him that. His ego's big enough as it is." Cora laughed, and for the first time in weeks, it felt like the weight on my chest had lifted. The pack was healing, I was healing, and as for Elias and me, well, we were just getting started. The infinity pool at Luna Haven was the kind of place that belonged on the cover of a luxury travel magazine. It stretched out toward the horizon, perfectly reflecting the night sky above, as if someone had scooped up a piece of the galaxy and laid it flat on the water. It was breathtaking, serene, and completely wasted on me at that moment. I was sitting at the edge, legs dangling in the cool water, trying to process the emotional whirlwind of the last few days. The whole Damon is a villain who bonded with me to wreak havoc saga had left me drained, but the pack was healing. Slowly. And I was surviving on caffeine and sheer determination, couldn't sleep. I turned at the sound of Elias's voice. He stood a few feet away, hands shoved in his pockets, his linen shirt unbuttoned at the collar. The moonlight caught the sharp lines of his jaw, and for a second, I forgot how to form words. "Seems to be a theme," I said finally, managing a small smile. "What about you? Shouldn't the Alpha be resting up for his next round of saving the world?" "Someone has to make sure you don't fall in," he said, his lips twitching into what might have been a smile. For Elias, that was practically a laugh. "Very noble of you," I teased. "Let me guess, next you're going to tell me the stars look better from this angle." He didn't reply. Instead, he walked over, sitting down beside me with a grace that felt completely unfair for someone his size. The water rippled around his legs as he stared out at the horizon, his profile silhouetted against the starlight. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the sound of the waves in the distance blending with the soft ripple of the pool. It was nice, peaceful. And then, just as I was starting to relax, he broke the quiet. "Serena," he said, his voice low, "there's something I need to tell you." My heart did that annoying flutter thing, and I hated how predictable it was. "Okay," I said, trying to sound casual even though my pulse was suddenly sprinting. He didn't look at me right away, his gaze fixed on the water. "I've been holding back," he said finally. "For a lot of reasons. For the pack, for you, for me. But after everything that's happened, I can't keep pretending." "Pretending what?" I asked, my voice softer now. He turned to face me then, his silver blue eyes meeting mine, and the intensity there nearly knocked the air out of my lungs. "That I don't feel something for you," he said, his words steady but quiet. "That I don't care about you more than I should." For a second, I forgot how to breathe. "Elias, I know it's complicated," he continued, his voice full of that rare vulnerability he usually kept hidden. "I know you've been through more than anyone should. But I need you to know that you're not just important to the pack, Serena. You're important to me." The weight of his words settled over me, warm and heavy, and completely overwhelming. I wanted to say something, but for once in my life, my snappy comebacks failed me. Instead, I just stared at him, my chest tight as 1,000 emotions fought for space. "You have this way of making everything seem lighter," he said, his lips twitching into a faint smile. "Even when the world's falling apart, you remind me why it's worth fighting for." I blinked, my throat tightening. "That's a lot of pressure to put on someone." "It's not pressure," he said softly. "It's the truth." For a moment, all I could do was look at him, the stars above us reflected in his eyes. He was so steady, so sure. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like I had to hold everything together on my own. "You know," I said finally, a small smile creeping onto my face, "you're not as bad at this emotional stuff as you think." He laughed, a real, warm laugh that sent a thrill through me. "Don't get used to it." "Too late," I said, grinning now. We sat there for a while longer, the silence between us filled with a new kind of warmth. When I finally leaned my head against his shoulder, he didn't pull away. Instead, he reached out, his hand brushing against mine before intertwining our fingers. It was simple, quiet, and perfect, and for the first time I didn't feel conflicted or unsure. I felt home. The night wrapped around us like a soft, velvety cocoon, the stars shimmering in the sky, as though they had gathered for this exact moment. The infinity pool stretched out behind us, its glassy surface reflecting the moonlight like liquid silver. Elias and I were alone, the kind of alone that made you hyper-aware of every breath, every glance, every flicker of tension between you. "You've gone quiet," Elias said, his voice low and rich, cutting through the gentle hum of the waves. He was watching me with those sharp, silver-blue eyes, the ones that saw straight through my walls. "Me? Quiet? Never," I quipped, though my voice wavered slightly. I was too aware of the way his knee brushed against mine, the heat radiating from him like a fire I couldn't pull away from. He smirked a small, knowing tilt of his lips that made my stomach do flips. "You're thinking too much." "I'm allowed to think," I shot back, tilting my chin. "It's one of my best qualities." "Maybe," he said, leaning closer, his voice softening, "but sometimes it's better to feel." I opened my mouth to reply, something witty and probably unnecessary, but the words never came. Because suddenly Elias was closer, his hand reaching up to tuck a loose strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers lingered, brushing against my cheek, and I swear the entire world tilted. "Serena," he murmured, his voice so quiet it was almost a whisper. "You feel it, don't you?" I did. I felt it everywhere, this pull between us, this bond that had been quietly weaving itself tighter and tighter, until there was no space left between us. It wasn't just physical, though that part was undeniable. It was deeper, something that wrapped around my heart and whispered, "This is where you belong." "I feel it," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. His gaze softened, the intensity giving way to something gentler. "Then let me show you." He didn't wait for me to respond. Instead, he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine with a tenderness that made my chest ache. The kiss started slow, soft, like he was giving me the chance to pull away. But I didn't. I couldn't. I tilted my head, deepening the kiss. And that was all it took for the tension between us to snap like a rubber band stretched too far. His hands slid to my waist, pulling me closer, and suddenly I was in his lap, his body warm and solid beneath mine. "Elias," I breathed against his lips, my hands tangling in his hair. "You're everything," he said, his voice rough as his lips moved to my jaw, then down to my neck. His hands roamed, steady but firm, like he was mapping every inch of me. "Do you know that? Do you have any idea what you mean to me?" The words sent a shiver through me, not just because of what he was saying, but because of how much I believed him. I'd never felt this before, this all-encompassing mix of love, desire, and absolute trust. It was intoxicating. Somehow we ended up inside, the soft glow of the villa's lanterns casting golden light over the room. Elias carried me effortlessly, like I weighed nothing, his eyes never leaving mine as he laid me down on the plush bed. "You're sure?" he asked, his voice softer now, his gaze searching mine. I nodded, my heart pounding. I've never been more sure of anything. That was all he needed. He leaned down, his lips claiming mine in a kiss that was anything but gentle. It was demanding and consuming, like he was pouring every ounce of emotion into it. And I matched him, kiss for kiss, touch for touch, letting myself be swept away. Clothes disappeared. Skin met skin, and the bond between us flared to life. It wasn't just physical, it was like every part of me was connecting with every part of him, the pieces fitting together in a way that felt inevitable and perfect. His touch was fire and comfort all at once, his movements deliberate, his focus entirely on me. When we finally came together, it was like the world exploded around us. The bond solidified, a rush of warmth and light flooding through me, as our emotions tangled together in a way that left no room for doubt. This was it. This was us. And nothing else mattered. We lay tangled together afterward, our breaths mingling as we stared at the ceiling, the world quiet once more. His hand traced lazy patterns on my back, his touch soothing and grounding. "Serena," he said, his voice soft, "you've changed everything." I turned to face him, my heart swelling at the vulnerability in his eyes. "And you've shown me everything I didn't know I needed." He smiled, a rare, unguarded smile that made my chest ache in the best way. "The bond feels different now," he said, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Stronger." "It's because it's real," I said, my voice steady. "Because we're real." And as he pulled me closer, his lips brushing against my forehead, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. Because this bond wasn't just about fate, it was about choice. And I chose him. The sunrise over Luna Haven was nothing short of spectacular. Golden light spilled across the horizon, stretching over the endless ocean, and bathing the resort in a glow so magical it could have been stolen straight from a Disney movie. Normally, I'd be soaking it in with a cup of tea and a good dose of sarcasm about early mornings. But today was different. Today I was standing at the head of the pack, our pack shoulder to shoulder with Elias. This is either the best idea I've ever had, I muttered under my breath, or the absolute worst. You'll be fine, Elias said, his voice calm and steady. He leaned toward me just slightly, his lips brushing against my ear. You've survived worse, like Damon. And that one time you decided to take on Cora in pool volleyball. She spiked the ball at my face. I shot back, though I couldn't keep the grin off my face. Exactly, he said, his lips twitching into the faintest smile. You're unshakable. The pack was gathered in the pavilion, a mix of familiar faces and some new ones who'd joined since Damon's dramatic exit. The energy in the air was different now, calmer, but not complacent. There was a sense of purpose, of unity that hadn't been there before. It was a good thing, too, because Elias and I had spent the better part of the last week putting out metaphorical fires. Between reorganizing pack duties, shoring up defenses, and reassuring everyone that we weren't about to descend into chaos again, there hadn't been much time to breathe. But standing there now, watching the pack fall into an easy rhythm, I felt proud. These were my people, our people, and together, we'd managed to stitch things back together after Damon's betrayal. You're staring, Elias murmured, his voice warm with amusement. Am not, I replied automatically, though I totally was. Do I need to remind you that you're supposed to be leading? He teased, tilting his head toward the group. Oh, I'm sorry, I said, turning to face him with a smirk. Isn't this your job? Alpha Cain, the big bad leader of Luna Haven? He leaned closer, his silver blue eyes glinting. It's our job, Serena. And for the record, you're the big bad leader now too. That shut me up. Elias stepped forward first, his presence commanding as always. The pack fell silent, their attention shifting to him like plants leaning toward the sun. As you all know, he began, his voice steady, we've been through a lot in the past few weeks. But we've come out stronger because of it. And now we're moving forward together. There was a ripple of murmurs and nods, but all eyes remained fixed on him. He glanced at me then, a flicker of warmth in his gaze. And as part of that, he continued, we're taking a new approach to leadership. He gestured toward me, and suddenly every pair of eyes in the pavilion was on me. No pressure or anything. I stepped forward, clearing my throat. Hi, I said, flashing what I hoped was a confident smile. So, fun fact, I didn't exactly sign up for this. But somewhere along the way, I kind of fell in love with this place. With all of you. Elias raised a brow, clearly amused, but he didn't interrupt. I'm not perfect, I went on. I'll probably make mistakes. But I care about this pack. And I'll do whatever it takes to protect it. There was a beat of silence, and then someone, Cora, because of course it was yelled, you'd better, or I'm stealing your snacks. The laughter that followed broke the tension, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just standing next to Elias, I was standing with the pack. After the meeting, Elias and I lingered by the infinity pool, the golden light of the morning casting long shadows across the water. Well, I said, leaning against the edge of the railing. That went better than expected. Better than your volleyball skills? Elias quipped, earning himself a playful shove. You're lucky you're cute, I shot back, though the warmth in my voice betrayed just how much I meant it. He turned to face me fully then, his gaze softening. You were incredible today. Yeah, he said, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from my face. You found your place here, Serena. And they see it too. I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down, flashing him a grin. Well, I had a pretty great teacher. He smirked, but his expression turned serious. This isn't going to be easy. There will be challenges, big ones. But whatever happens, we'll face it together. Together, I echoed, the words settling over me like a promise. And as I looked out at the pack, at the endless horizon beyond the pool, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. Whatever came next, I knew we could handle it, because we weren't just a pack, we were a family.